The rules are simple. No civilization. Today, I've got a collection of allegedly real encounters about the creepy, absolutely messed up stuff people have seen in the wilderness. So, tie yourself to a tree and prepare for the worst. Remember, if you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. We're looking for tales about campers and RVs, or Halloween. And of course, we'd love to hear stories on other topics too. Now, let's begin. Warning: the following story contains written illustrations of dead animals that some viewers may find disturbing. Timestamps are in the description. Thank you. What do the crow feathers mean? From Wicca Boo. Growing up as a little girl in the backwoods of rural eastern Pennsylvania, I learned a lot of things. I learned how to make a fort. I learned what plants I could eat and what to avoid. I learned how to tell what track belonged to which animal. And most importantly, I learned what places I should never go. My earliest memory of the 200 acres of state game land that our property sat in the middle of was something I'll never forget. At the age of around 6 or 7, I can remember that one day that I heard mewing coming from under the porch. When I peered under the wooden steps, I stumbled upon 2 very different cats. My mother came home to find me grass-stained and sitting with a fluffy black and white kitten and a scraggly old gray cat with matted fur. Not until she called my name did I turn to face her with a cut across my face. Right then, she knew that we'd have to name them. So we did. Baby and Scar. I came home every day to play with these cats until my mom decided that we couldn't take care of them both, and my neighbor adopted Baby, the cute little kitten, leaving me stuck with Scar. Scar was a strange cat. As much as I loved and enjoyed him, he of course was not my cat so much as nature's cat. He would always leave me dead things like birds and mice to clean up. Scar knew how to survive and thrive in the woods. He seemed to know every path hiding in the whole game lands. Although Scar, the beast, would wander off always, he never failed to be waiting for me back at home. So of course I was surprised when I got home from school one day, and my lovely Scar was nowhere to be found. I decided, of course, I would find him. I trekked off into the woods past the stream on the property and into dense forest. The trees waved in the slight breeze and the sun shone overhead. Birds chirped and leaves rustled. Despite how distraught I was about possibly losing my beloved little monster of a cat, I was beginning to enjoy myself on this walk. Just as soon as I began humming to myself, I could hear a mewing off in the distance. Of course, that makes so much sense that Scar would know my voice. That's what I thought, so I bolted in the direction of the meow. Soon I found that the sound of my feet crunching the leaves below blocked out the subtle mewing in the distance. I slowed down to realize that I no longer heard my Scar's meows, and I heard absolutely nothing at all. The only noise that was made were my footsteps. The birds had stopped their songs, and the wood's movement from the wind had gone dead still. The sun had now fallen behind some clouds, creating a thin shadow of darkness under the already blackened tree coverage. Due to this silence, my ears sharpened. My other senses seemed to focus too. I looked around, wondering where I was, and if I could even get back. I thought about how my mom must have gotten home by now. She'd be so mad at me for running off in the middle of nowhere before she got home. My eyes focused on a cleared spot in the dense brush. I realized I'd found a trail. My survival guide brain kicked in and I rationalized that it must lead somewhere, so I figured I could follow it and eventually get home, or at the very least to a road. I began to walk, and walk, and walk. I began to notice something that piqued my attention. I always kept my eyes at my feet while I walked, because I was a clumsy child, and I was afraid I would trip over a root or twig. So when I was staring at my little boots in the mud and leaves, I began to notice a color that you don't always see in nature. Bright red. I inspected the leaf with the dense red liquid on it, and I knew what it was. I'd seen blood before, as I had scraped my knees pretty bad many times. At first, my mind began racing. Would I find Scar? Would he be dead? No. Just keep walking. Follow the trail. The blood followed the trail too, though. Every step I walked to avoid the drips and drops and splatters. But my little mind was relieved when the blood had feathers instead of cat fur. The shiny black feathers were large and had a green tint to them. I figured at some point I'd find the animal they belonged to, all mangled and no longer living. I was dreading that scene until I had an epiphany. Perhaps my Scar had killed many a small creatures. He'd left a trail of blood up my wooden porch dozens of times, leaving us plenty of little cat presents. This had to be him, had to be my Scar. I raced and dashed among the branches and ferns. Somewhere the blood led, somewhere that my Scar would be. I just knew it. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped and my shoe got stuck under a log, sending me flying forward. I had skidded across the forest floor and my shoe got taken off, still wedged under the log. My arm had hit a rock and it tingled, but I found myself brushing off my clothes and hopping back up. I was okay. I refocused. I was following a trail. A trail. My eyes beated back and forth for the trail, but it was gone. Where had it gone? It was just there. I frantically turned, searching for that familiar crimson color that I'd followed for what must have been miles. But it was gone. I abruptly sat there and cried. I knew it. That was Scar, and I had no hope of finding him. Just as I opened my eyes, wiping tears away, my vision corrected and revealed yet another color that you rarely see in nature. Fluorescent pink. I knew that color, though. It was the one my dad used to mark the trees on our property line. The ones he never got around to cutting down. I knew where to go now. If I just run towards the tree, my house would come into view soon after. So that's what I did. For the last time, I ran overjoyed to be in a familiar place. Just as my driveway came into view, my mother's car was pulling into the parking spot. I ran to her and hugged her with the biggest 6-year-old squeeze. She smiled at me and said, "You're sure happy to see me?" I pleaded with her not to punish me, that I was sorry for being gone so long. She frowned and scolded me for being in the woods alone, but said she had no idea what I was talking about. She had just got home. My mom got home from work every day only 20 minutes after I got home from school. This did not make sense, though. I'd been gone for several hours, lost in the trees, following a feathery, bloody trail. My little kid brain wasn't too bothered by that gap in time, however. The only thing that mattered was that I was home. I was safe. I was secure with my mom. When I pulled away out of her arms, I noticed something behind her. the crimson drips across the concrete that formed a walkway to my porch. He was home. I knew it this time. I jumped across the concrete, turning toward my deck toward the stairs. I was right. Scar had come home to me just as I'd wished. I expected to see him there, with a crow jutting from his jaws, and though this was nearly the case, something was wrong. I fell backward, and a wave of dread crashed over me. My Scar had come home, all right, but he had been mangled and crushed with fresh blood still creating little plops on the steps below. His gray stripes could barely be seen under the coat of deep color liquid. His limbs seemed to have been pulled from their sockets, dislocated and broken. He had become a mess of a carcass, nearly unrecognizable. But I knew it was him. I could always tell him apart. For as much as no one would believe, he was my cat. The only distinguishing thing in this mass of mess was a single reflecting crow's feather. Now, let me fill you in on some things that you didn't know before. Things that I certainly didn't know when I was 6 years old. Our woods were on Native American land, or what used to be their land. There are 3 signs outside of the development that talk about how the natives gave the land to the pioneers, and however quirky and nice that sounds, it's simply not the truth. I soon found out that the land was sacred and had been stolen from the tribes. One of the signs, that is very dilapidated, states that there was a wagon trail that led the mountaineers here, and they started building mines under where all the houses are. In fact, there are these old mountaineer homes that are abandoned on a trail near my own house. Every time I explored one of these houses, I found a new dead creature. Not freshly dead, usually just bones. There used to be a dead crow nailed to the ceiling of one of the houses. However, it has since been moved by someone or something. Lastly, during my trip to a clearing behind my home, I found an arrowhead in the dirt. This land is now mostly owned by the state, but my house is here, and I know it was never meant to be. I've come to the conclusion that some sort of native curse or entity had killed my cat, leaving the feather as a sign. I know that the crow feathers must mean something, because I would always continue to find them wherever I found dead animals. I know it sounds odd, unbelievable even. I wish I could be more informed on the subject. But believe me when I say the last thing I want to do is to anger the natives and their spirits. Werewolf of Monroe Lake, from Dannyjo. My brother and I went on a fishing trip to Monroe Lake in Indiana. We've been there hundreds of times before, all over the place. We left on a Friday morning and got there Friday late afternoon. We brought a John boat and some basic essentials, like a tent, my gun, just a small .38 Special revolver, his gun, a .22 lever-action rifle, and some firewood. We didn't bring much food, because we thought we'd just eat fish and some small game if needed. We loaded everything into the boat and went off. It was quickly getting dark, though, and the only light we had were the ones on the boat, and a small flashlight. After being on the water for about an hour, we found a small cove really perfect for us, because it was out in the middle of nowhere. We could fish any way we wanted. We unloaded the boat and set up camp. My brother got a fire going, and I began fishing because I was getting hungry. After a few minutes, the crickets just stopped chirping. I wasn't getting any bites either, so I figured it was a better time than any to start walking back to camp. We set up about 20 yards from the boat. When I got back to my brother, I asked him if he noticed the lack of sounds around us, and he replied I didn't really notice till now. Then, together as we listened, we heard a loud howl that sounded like it was about a mile away. Chills went down my spine, and my brother began to tremble. I could see it in his hands. I spoke. That was creepy. But what are we doing, dude? We're both grown men. Nothing we can't handle. Yeah, he said. Probably a coyote. We both decided to lie down in the tent and call it a night, but I got my gun out just to be safe, because a mile out here in the woods isn't very far. The next morning we woke up and got the day started. We thought we'd go and see if we could find the footprint or scat trail of a coyote, figuring that's what we heard last night. We ventured about 500 yards into the woods from our camp when we came up on a small coyote, but the thing had been ripped to shreds. My brother was curious as to what had done this, possibly another coyote, a bear, or mountain lion. But after seeing this, I was more interested in going back to camp. We got back and I went for my phone to text my dad. I asked what big predators live out here that could take down a coyote. It took a minute or two before he texted back. He replied, maybe some cougars, but not much else. So I figured it was either that or just a bigger coyote. We decided to only stay one more night, as we didn't want to be attacked by whatever did that. We went out on the boat for a while, fishing. We weren't having any luck on the cove, so we went to this rock face that we called Crappie Honey Hole, as we always caught crappie there. Finally, we started catching some fish, and we didn't stop until the sun began to set. We were both starving that day. Eventually, we called it a day and started back to camp. Our little boat didn't go very fast, but it was better than a canoe or kayak. By the time we made it back to camp, it was completely dark, and it was quiet like it was the previous night. We slid the boat on the bank and started out. We made a beeline for the fire pit to cook up our catches, only to notice that our camp now looked like a war zone. Everything had been torn up and thrown around, like someone was looking for something. We both grabbed our guns quickly and took off the safety, looking at each other with the same expression. Expressions that said, we're not alone out here. We didn't grab anything else, and we started to make our way to the boat. As we did, we began to hear a deep, gurgling growl. It was closer than the previous night. As we get to the boat, my brother grabs the flashlight and points it towards camp. The both of us stop. Fear like I'd never felt before filled my body, because the flashlight revealed two big yellow eyes. They were about 5 feet off the ground. Both of us were trembling now, beginning to back up. My brother jumped into the boat. He pulled the ripcord, and the boat roared to life. I followed him into the boat, but I didn't take my eyes off of the thing in the woods. I crawled in. I looked away for less than a second, and when I looked back, the creature was gone. We pulled into the water, and I used the flashlight to look for the thing in the bushes, but it was nowhere to be found. We never thought to stay away from the bank and to get further away from it. We didn't think we'd be attacked out in the water. But we were wrong, because suddenly, to my right, the creature came rushing out of the bank. I saw it in detail then. It was more than 6 feet tall, with a body that was canine-like and human-like at the same time. I pointed the flashlight instinctively right at it, as if it was a gun and I was trying to protect myself. I could make out a piece of nylon sticking to one of its claws, a shred of our tent. I panicked and fell backward after that, pushing my brother out of the way to put the throttle on high. We barely made it out of that thing's clutches. I was wanting to get as far away as possible. We made it back to the boat ramp area, got the boat loaded in record time, and we booked it out of there in the truck. We didn't talk one bit all the way home, and never said much about this to Mom or Dad, even though they were concerned about where their tint went, as we had borrowed it. I'm in my 30s now, and I haven't been back to Monroe Lake. I'm scared to go back, and on the occasion my friends or family say that they're planning to go there, I try to convince them otherwise. Something on the Roof, from Cyven. I'm from the Philippines, which is a third world country. We have 3 major islands which are named Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. I live on the latter, in a rural area in Misamis Oriental. Our area here is pretty quiet, especially at night. But last week, when I was doing my chemistry homework, I heard a thud from the roof. I didn't pay much mind to it. This was normal because we have mango trees around, and mangoes often fall from them and hit the roof. But as I continued to listen, these sounds continued, and they had a pattern to them, like a person walking. When I realized that it was something walking around, I grew scared, not knowing what's out there. I slept on the sofa with the lights turned on that night. The following day, nothing really happened except for an announcement from my cousin, who said that she was pregnant. Our houses are inside one compound, making it close together, and when I heard her say that she was pregnant, I began to worry. A lot of folks in the Philippines are superstitious. We believe in mythical creatures, one of which is called the Tik-Tik. It resembles a human, but with wings. In fact, it's featured in many of our films here. I was scared for her, but I didn't want her to worry, so I didn't mention what I'd heard the previous night. Instead, I congratulated her, and I wished her and her baby well. For the next week after that, I kept hearing it on the roof every night. It seemed to be looking for something it never found, because after my cousin had her baby several months later, only then did the sounds stop. Alien in the Yard, from Painted Dragon 90. This happened when I was 11 years old. My little brother was 8. We lived in a small town in Ohio, growing up surrounded by woods and lakes. The summer after our father left, we were left in the hands of a careless babysitter who did nothing but smoke cigarettes and talk to her friends on the phone. She would leave us outside for several hours to basically screw around until my mom got home. Again, I'll remind you, we lived in the middle of nowhere out here, and the nearby town was a small one. One day it was a particularly late evening, and my mom had not gotten home yet. Our babysitter sent us out into the backyard with a badminton set and told us to play. My brother kept annoyingly hitting the birdie too hard, so we'd have to keep retrieving them from the thick woods behind the house. Eventually, we got bored with using birdies, so we switched over to tennis balls. Again, my brother was hitting them way too hard, and them being tennis balls, they rolled way past the tree line. Frustrated, I pointed in the direction where the ball disappeared, and I demanded that he get it. But he didn't want to go by himself. We walked into the brush, careful to avoid the poison ivy, and tried to locate the ball. We couldn't find it anywhere. But as we looked, we suddenly heard a noise like sticks breaking. There was something else walking around out here. I was afraid we were a bit too close to a large animal, like a deer or worse. I told my brother to head back inside, but he didn't go back. Instead, he froze there. I kept asking him what was wrong. "What's going on with you?" I said. But the only thing he could do was point. About 20 to 25 yards away from us, there was some kind of animal. From what I could make out, it had very large eyes and a tiny slit for a mouth. No nose, no hair, just like the gray aliens you see on TV. Safe to say, my brother and I were both too terrified to move. After a few moments passed, the creature ducked behind the tree and disappeared. My brother and I slowly backed out of the woods and made it back to our house. When my mother got home from work, I tried to tell her everything that happened. But my brother would not agree with me. He refused to tell her the truth. He lied instead, saying that we hadn't seen anything. My brother and I shared a bedroom at the time that had a window facing the backyard. He and I went to bed, but did not go to sleep. Of course, that night I began complaining at my brother for what he'd done. How could he lie about that? Why would he make my mom think that I'm a liar? She thinks I'm crazy now, I thought. Just as I was berating him, we heard a thump at the window. My brother and I obviously immediately assumed the worst. We debated closing the blinds. Since I was on the top bunk, I could reach the string, but I really didn't want to move. I was so scared that that alien would see me. Eventually, I gathered the courage to get up and to pull the string. But as I got up to my knees to reach over, I made the mistake of glancing out the window. I immediately soiled myself. That thing, the exact thing we'd seen in the woods. It was staring at me, just staring with those big black eyes. My brother saw it too and began to scream and cry. My mom woke up, and she wasn't happy. Instead of explaining anything, we just sat there crying. I've never forgotten these events. To this day, I have no idea why my brother threw me under the bus. Even now, nearly 20 years later, my mom still thinks I made up the story, all because my brother wouldn't open his mouth. The Watchers, from Dragonlord 2082. This happened in 2006 in northern Kentucky. We had been in our new house for roughly a year when I began noticing a dark figure watching our house from the trees. We had woods behind our house, and that's where I saw it. One day after coming home from work, I headed out to the backyard to work in the garden and to gather some fruits and vegetables to make dinner for the night. While out at the back part of the garden, I heard the crunching of leaves and sticks coming from the shallow woods. I didn't think much of it, as there was a heavily used game trail just inside the trees, so I figured it was some sort of animal. I continued what I was doing, then headed back into the house, but now I had a feeling that I was being watched. I stopped and looked around but did not see anything, but it was pretty dark at that point. I headed into the house to help make dinner. After dinner, I started to do dishes and happened to glance out the back window. And there, I saw a dark figure standing at the tree line. I turned around to yell for my wife, but when she finally came over to the kitchen window, the figure had left. Figuring my eyes were just playing tricks on me, I finished up the dishes and turned off the lights in the kitchen. I sat down in the living room to play some Xbox. It was around 12 a.m. when the back motion lights came on. That wasn't too abnormal because the neighbor had like 50 cats that would tramp through my yard at all hours of the day. So I ignored it and went back to playing my game. I'm not sure how long it was after the last time. You know how it is when you play a really good game and lose all track of time. But suddenly the back lights came on again. This time I paused the game and I got up to check it out. When I looked out the back door, there were no cats outside at all, but there was a dark humanoid figure moving around in the far back part of the yard towards the trees. I walked out the door onto the back deck to see if I could make out what it was. When I got outside, the figure froze and just stood still. It looked as if whatever it was had its gaze set on me. To test my idea, I moved around to see where its eyes would adjust, and sure enough, the eyes followed me. At this point, I have no idea what's going on or what the hell that thing is, so I backed up slowly while keeping my eyes on it as I went back into the house. I then turned off all the lights in the house and watched through the blinds. The figure didn't move for a while, so the back lights suddenly went out. I watched a bit longer, then went back to my bedroom. But as soon as I laid back in bed, the lights came back on. This time, I looked up from my bed, and there was a shadow just outside my bedroom window. I pulled the cover over my head, stifling a scream, and I shut my eyes. Eventually, I fell asleep like that. The next day was quiet, and everything seemed to go back to normal. Ever since then, I've seen this figure on occasion in my yard, until I was absolutely horrified to see it inside my house. Just outside my bedroom door, actually. This kept going until I moved out from that house. I don't miss it, and I hope those things don't follow me. Imagine something that could rip you in half easily. Now imagine that it can move more quickly than you without making a sound. That's what lurks in the wilderness. While humans have pretty much stopped evolving specifically to live in the wild, there are creatures that continue to become more perfect in their malevolent tasks. So be careful out in the wilderness, because beyond the tree line, everything is either predator or prey. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. We accept all stories, but specifically, we'd love to hear stories about Halloween or campers and RVs. If you want to support the show, check the links below. There's a link to my Patreon and a link to my merch store. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 5 allegedly real encounters with the Wendigo. Silhouette Sonata says, forced. I'm not sure if you're trying to say forest or first, but hello, I guess. Sir Lucas says, the best kind of stories. Now to just not get eaten by a Wendigo and I'll be all good. Hey, on the bright side, if you do get eaten by a Wendigo, the Wendigo will transform into David Bowie. Take that as you will. Liz Santiago says, born out of desperation and hunger, huh? Sounds like me without a midnight snack. Same here, Liz. If I'm hungry in the middle of the night, I also get reborn from my mother's womb. Get it? I'm taking the part about being born, literally? Yeah, okay, my jokes are awful. Jaden Corsino says, this channel is the shiz. At first I read that comment without the word the, and I was taking some harsh criticism. Crazy how the word the can change that meaning entirely. Ash James says, would rather die from starvation than ever become a creature such as the Wendigo. Pretty much. If you get cursed to be a Wendigo, you're doomed to die, basically. And you also get doomed to make other people die by eating them. It's a lose-lose. But if you choose to just starve instead, it's only one lose. And Taylor Ayuso says, I made it to the first 5 comments. Can I just say your voice is the best to go to sleep to, Darkness? Thank you very much, Taylor. As long as you guys don't hear me snore with an accent, which I somehow do, then you'll keep loving me. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who support the show. They're awesome. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.